Israel has launched an attack on Iran's capital with the help of the United States.
Fears the conflict is entering a dangerous new phase as Iran strikes back across the Middle East.
A war breaks out.
In the Strait of Hormuz, hundreds of ships have been stranded since the conflict broke out.
Less than 3 months on, and more than 12,000 kilometres away, Australian farmers find themselves with an input crisis.
Without a doubt, this is the biggest farming challenge I've had, and I would dare say the biggest farming challenge most Australian farmers have had probably in their farming careers.
At York, in Western Australia's wheat belt, Rhys Turton is on the cusp of planting wheat, barley, canola and an unexpected lupins crop.
We're changing on the run.
He'd been planning to leave lupins out for 2026, but recently decided to put the legume, which doesn't need nitrogen fertiliser, back in. It'll make up about 15% of his crop this year, while another 10% of the program won't be planted at all.
We'll actually leave out and just rest those paddocks for the year. So we've made a change of probably in the order of about 25% of what we had planned pre the 28th of February when the war broke out. So, yeah, and really that was, I guess, as a result of a lack of available fertiliser and particularly your post-nitrogen fertiliser.
Rhys, who chairs farm lobby group Grain Growers, has some fertiliser in his shed ready for seeding. But he'd like to fill it twice more with nitrogen-rich urea to see his crops through to harvest. He expects he'll only get 60% of what he needs, despite paying twice the price paid last year.
I've certainly heard of growers that are not putting a crop in. I think it was sort of quite a big public news event that Gina Reinhardt had bought a large cropping farm in Western Australia, and they announced that they would not be putting a crop in this year just due to the cost of doing it.
There's certainly a lot of challenges at the moment in terms of access to fertiliser. We can already see that prices are extremely high. Since the beginning of the year, we've seen prices for urea fertilisers specifically. They've increased about 94%.
Studying the fertiliser market is Rabobank analyst Paul Jules.
I think that's really the primary issue, is that all-important Strait of Hormuz. And people often refer to this as the energy jugular of the world, because you see huge volumes of fertiliser pass through this really small shipping channel.
30% of the world's urea, 27% of ammonia, 24% of phosphates, and almost half of sulphur exports, all key inputs for agriculture, transit through the strait. But fighting in the region means ships can't get through, and an estimated 0.8 million tonnes per month of fertiliser has dropped out of the global market. Compounding the fertiliser crunch, the collapse of LNG fields in Qatar has significantly restricted the amount of nitrogen that's produced in India, Pakistan and Bangladesh.
There's a lot of moving parts that aren't necessarily just happening in the Middle East, but also it's affecting a lot of countries in a lot of different ways.
Paul says the crisis has split major food-producing nations into two groups. One that includes the likes of China and Russia, which manufacture a lot of fertiliser, and another, including Brazil, India and Australia, that rely heavily on imports.
So we're more exposed to these supply chains. And it actually means that those countries that are big producers of those fertilisers, they have mechanisms that they can pull. So they can choose to effectively stop exporting these fertilisers in order to protect their domestic markets. And that's potentially what we could see. We could see more protectionism in these markets. We could see countries, for example, such as Russia and China, potentially choose whether they want to actually export those fertilisers in order to favour that domestic production. So it's definitely not even. We're probably on the wrong side of that equation.
With grain prices easing, Paul says for many farmers, the cost of growing a crop will be higher than the return.
We're also seeing chemical prices are starting to rise as well, so that obviously adds to the input inflation. But I would say it probably varies a bit by commodity. So wheat margins look exceptionally tight, barley fairly tight, Canola maybe has a bit more potential, and that's off the back of increased biofuel because we've got these rising oil prices, and then that can actually help to push up those canola prices. So maybe the best margin could actually come out of canola. It's a bit of a wait and see.
Representing the multi-billion-dollar fertiliser industry in Canberra is Stephen Annals.
Last year was a record year of 8.75 million tonnes, and that's up from about 6 million tonnes in 2020.
With such huge numbers, the CEO at Fertiliser Australia says storage capacity simply hasn't been available to keep more fertiliser in Australia.
The other answer is there are some fertilisers that have a shelf life as well, particularly nitrogen fertilisers. They won't last forever. They will volatilise into the atmosphere.
In WA's Pilbara, a privately owned $6 billion urea plant is being developed, with production at least a year away. Right now, there's no significant manufacturing of nitrogen-rich urea in the country, and before the Strait closed, 60% of Australia's urea came from the Middle East. Initial calls by some to remove trade bans on Russian imports or relax restrictions on ammonium nitrates designed to prevent terrorism are so far proving moot. But Stephen says alternative supplies are being found.
Australian importers, fertiliser importers, are quite resourceful. There are other places we can source this product from, such as Southeast Asia, but we're also in this situation going as far afield as West Africa to source fertiliser.
The federal government says it's secured 250,000 tonnes of urea from Indonesia. It's also changed the biosecurity process at the border to speed up imports, and says it's ready to underwrite shipments of fertiliser by private companies Incitec Pivot and CSBP.
There are obviously commercial arrangements to get fertiliser into the country, and we will continue to work with them if it is required for underwriting. But can I say there is enough fertiliser in Australia now or on the water for the initial planting season?
The main issue is coming down the track, so it isn't actually visible to everyone and it isn't really being spoken about.
Farmers will typically apply fertiliser at sowing, which is happening right around Australia and over my shoulder right now. But later in the growing season, they'll look to do what's called top dressing, when they'd typically apply a lot more fertiliser. Last year, Australia imported something like 3 million tonnes of urea.
It's not really in people's faces right now, but it is a mammoth issue.
Do you know how much urea we've got in Australia at the moment?
We're actually trying to work with the government to determine that, so we're hoping to have a bit of a clearer picture soon.
Do you know what the shortfall is?
Well, that's the other component of it. And that'll come down to what sort of season it's going to be, and also come down to some contraction in demand as well. We are very, very keen to get the message out to growers, though, that growers should be speaking with their suppliers. Very unlikely in this situation, in this season, that they'll be able to get product if they don't contract.
The last few years has been reasonably tough around here.
At Corowa in southern New South Wales, Merck Scowen says urea is essential for cropping.
If we're not applying fertiliser, we're mining the soil. So it is this gradual decline.
Like Rhys Churton and his lupins, Merck is hoping to offset some of his farm's input needs by growing this crop of adzuki beans.
It's increasing on productivity.
Because these beans are putting the nitrogen
Because they're putting nitrogen back in the soil. And these beans are producing, on average, 50% of the nitrogen we'd need for a winter crop. So it's significant, right?
It's his 10th year of growing the summer crop, which still uses some fertiliser at planting. The beans only make up a small part of the farm. Despite the input troubles, Merck says it's too late to change his plans, and he's going ahead with nitrogen-dependent canola, wheat and barley.
Whilst being adaptive is really important, I think the period of time when this conflict's broken out, we were somewhat organised for the program that we generally put in. It's held us in good stead now for a long time, so we've decided to stick with it.
If the farm's rainfall is average, he figures he'll need twice as much urea as he currently has. But Merck thinks he's saved by ordering what he does have early.
For our small business, that's an increase. If I'd bought no nitrogen to buying after the conflict had started was, $400,000 to $500,000 difference in cost to the business. So it's huge. You know, we're talking big numbers.
It's not just the croppers being squeezed.
Farmers can't afford to keep wearing these extra fuel and fertiliser costs and going backwards. I mean, it's a viability issue for long-term sustainable farming in Australia.
An April survey of 200 veggie growers found 28% had already reduced or stopped their planting schedule due to flow-on effects of the war in the Middle East. The National Farmers Federation says grocery prices are likely to jump.
Some of our horticultural producers have decided not to plant because of the costs of fertiliser and fuel, that if they can't receive more from our metropolitan areas, from our consumers, and we're talking in the order of 20 to 30% more for those products that they do produce, some are choosing not to plant, so that will flow on to more expensive produce in our supermarkets.
I think this will take a while to pass through to the consumer. I think it's probably a little bit away. We always see quite a significant lag between these higher commodity prices and what you see on the supermarket levels.
A conversation farmers are keen to have immediately is about developing domestic manufacturing.
It's just crazy that we find ourselves in this situation when we just have such an abundance of everything we need here. We should be getting through this conflict, this constraint period, without a hiccup at all, basically, because we have everything we need here. It's just a matter of having the will.
Australia has one of the largest sources of natural gas in the world, and also has the second largest deposit of phosphates in the Georgina Basin, which is up on the Queensland Northern Territory border. So those two products are the two major fertiliser products that we use. Natural gas is used to make ammonia, which is a derivative of urea and other nitrogen fertilisers.
When this is all over, Kath, I mean, we cannot revert to just in time as we did after COVID. We've got to enable manufacturing in Australia. We need to have plants on both sides of Australia that produces nitrogen, particularly urea, cost effectively, and not just for ourselves. It's a national security issue for our neighbours too.
Andrew Henderson has long warned of the pitfalls of relying on what's known as just-in-time supply chains.
It's like going to the supermarket every night to buy only exactly what you need for that meal and repeating that process every single day.
He's now chairing a food supply chain assessment for the federal government.
The world that we live in is not stable, and it's becoming more unstable as time goes by. So that tells us that, that system, that structure, those supply chains are no longer fit for purpose.
Even if the fighting stopped tomorrow and shipping resumed, farmers are being warned to expect the aftershocks to reverberate for some time.
We will battle through this year as best we can. I don't think there'll be any winners this year in agriculture.
I think the worst is in front of us, and it's going to come down to factors that we can't control.
The uncertainty is just incredible. It's nerve-wracking times in agriculture in Australia, and it's not just grain farming, it's anybody that farms anything.